Hello again, this is J-Bot with the second part of our Punisher battle report. As you can see, we have shifted the camera over to the left a little bit to capture the whole table, or at least most of the table. And you can see here on the left-hand side the base. The two gray sections are actually the shield generators, and the dice tower in the center is the base itself. So the goal here is to destroy those two shield generators, and that will open up the center base to be attacked and destroyed. Here we are following on from the end of the last video, finishing up the movement here on turn 3. You can see Jim is slowly moving his guys around. We've actually got the first half of it done. That was finished in the last video, and he's finishing up the second half. And still he's fighting with his base here again. I think he finally just gave up and decided to make this into what I like to call a low rider. In other words, he took the peg out and put it straight to the base. There's a couple ships you can do this with, and the Headhunter is one of them. I actually store mine this way and rarely ever put a peg underneath it, just because it's simpler and I am lazy. Jim's continuing to move his guys around. You can already see what I mentioned in the previous video, where Jim is really starting to cluster these guys up. And in this firing phase, he's going to get punished for it pretty heavily. Pardon the pun, since that's the name of this mission. He'll continue to consolidate these guys in, and Jason and I kind of took this for granted at this point. He'd really shown his hand, and we thought there was not much chance of him kind of bailing out of it. Once you've committed to this, you really can't get out of this strategy. And this game is not going to last much longer. Here's Jason finishing up the last couple moves. He and I start to have a discussion about where to target lock, what to target lock to get the most bang for our buck. Since these two pilots, these two Punishers, will be firing before any of Jim's ships, we wanted to make sure that they got the best shots, and anything that was dead after them, we kept target locks away from. We wanted to make sure their shots were the most important. They hit the critical things and were able to do the most damage. Here you can see he's using, I think that's Death Rain, the one that lets you have 2 target locks. And we actually went ahead and just double target locked that proximity mine cluster there in the center. And here I am moving the Epic ship up, and you can see I went ahead and ran over that mine that was right in front of us. We had already done 2 damage to it in previous turn, and so I had to roll for the 1 damage for running over it. I actually did roll a hit, so I took a shield off there on my ship, and now you can see me start to move the energy around. Again, I mentioned this last time, because of, I believe, the title on the ship lets me have up to 6 energy held in it. If I put 2 of that energy into the guns, the optimized generators gives me 2 energy right back that fills the storage bank right back up, which is great for a support ship. It's always key to have tons of energy for these, so when you do get stuck in, it's big. Jason's finally firing off with Death Rain here, and he has no trouble at all destroying this. Jim tries to play a little shenanigans with his range 1 template, but of course I'm not letting him have any of that. And you can see, as I mentioned in the previous video, just how much damage can be done by a assault missile hitting the middle of your formation. And he ends up doing damage to almost every ship around there. He was just out of range of hitting the Gazanti with it, and but everything else in that little circle took 1 point of damage, and it cleared the cluster mine out of there. So cluster mine was really a free shot to do 1 point of damage to all those ships around it. Here as we move forward, Jason continues to lay in the assault here, and the next thing he actually does with his follow-up Punisher here, whose name I do not know, but it's the other named one, is he actually fires a flechette torpedo, I believe is what he's firing here, at that Seek that's right in front of the Gazanti. So I don't know if he did 1 damage or not, but he definitely stressed it, which really kind of stuck Jim in a really bad position. He's got a Seek staring down the middle of the Gazanti, and he really needs to get out of the way of it, but he needs to take a really sharp turn in order to do that. And that stress kind of hampers him. He actually changed it to one of the big tokens from Sling Paint, so you can see it a little bit better here. He did attack. He did end up attacking the Punisher back with that Seek to try and do a little damage. Jason's actually keeping his damage tokens off the table just so it's a little bit less cluttered here. And but he did do a point or two of damage there to the Punisher, which didn't really have an opportunity to evade. It's got really low evade dice. And in future videos, we're gonna work on actually letting you guys see these rolls, either through a camera shot of the rolls themselves or with a little animation or something to kind of show what's happening. But what he's doing, Jim's continuing to fire his guys that have pilot skill 4s, because they actually get to fire first. Although it's simultaneous, they get to fire first before the other two Punishers do. And he's made a different tact. He's trying to do some damage to the Gazanti now. It was a bit of an interesting decision by him to do this and not just continue to hammer against those Punishers, because the Punishers are a bigger damage output threat. But he did put some damage on the Gazanti a little bit. He took some shields off of it. You can't see them keeping those. They're actually behind that little stack of towers there, the sand towers to the upper right hand corner. But Jason decides to continue pushing back, and he does damage to the. He actually fired his another assault missile at the headhunter there, right next to the turret. And you can see Jim held up the card for a direct hit. Destroyed the turret, destroyed that ship. I mean, he one-shotted that ship with that assault missile, and he did one more point of damage to the headhunter right in front of him. And now Jason's going to light up that last headhunter. Knowing him, he is more than likely firing a cluster missile if he has it. And that's where you see the two dice rolls there. And that one's gone too. So very quickly, you can see how that decision by Jim to kind of cluster his troops there along that upper right, or the upper corner here, the right-hand side of our formation, left-hand side of his own, he paid for it. And his whole flank got melted there. And this is before we even fired the Gazanti. And the Gazanti ended up being too close to fire at single turbo lasers. So I ended up firing at the turret that's further down here on the table towards the bottom of the screen. I was able to do some good damage, spend one more energy to flip one of those eyeballs to a hit. So it did a little bit of damage to that turret down there. With 5 hull, I can't really destroy it in one turn without some really lucky dice. But he continues to fire back. Everything's out of range for him except for those 2 turbo lasers, which he does forget to fire here. We get a little excited to get to moving and putting our dials down here. And we get everything picked up, everything cleaned up, dials chosen. And then once Jim starts to move here, we remember, or he remembers, that he forgot to fire the turbo lasers. So being the sporting folks that we are, and because this is casual, it's not really that big of a deal. We let him go ahead and take those shots as a follow-up. And he was firing at the Punishers again. This is where he's starting to get a little scattered with his focus. Instead of hammering straight onto the Gazanti or the Punishers, he's kind of spreading his fire a bit, and that's really hurting him. I don't know that it could have helped him when you see what the next turn has in store for him, but he is trying to at least take out one of those Punishers. And you can see here to the far left, he has two other ships here. Every turn he's getting 15 points, little shield tokens, I believe is what we were using, or energy tokens to keep track of it. So he's getting 3 sets of 5 every turn, and he can spend those every turn, as many of them as he wants. He can save them up to buy bigger ships, or just spend them, as he gets them. But he had been saving them up for a few turns, and he's gone ahead and he's brought out 2 more ships into the fight. One of them, I believe, is named. I'm not 100% sure, but I believe one of them is named, and but the other one is just a generic. He only allowed in the rules to have one of a named person come out afterwards. So otherwise, it's just generic ships, and that's fun. They're all it's Karaz fighters in this case, but he built the points to 15 points so that he could actually take a headhunter every turn. With I think Deadman switch is what he was putting on them, and so if he wanted to, from the very first turn, he could have been bringing out one headhunter, but instead he decided to save up for some beefier, harder hitting ships. So here we are. This is turn 4. I know it's been a bit of a long video and sped up, double speed, so we're moving pretty quick. But we've already chosen the dials here for turn 4, and you can see Jim here starting to move. What ends up happening is he tries to cut hard in because he still wants to keep his ships focused on us and try and get in there and do as much damage as he can. But Jason kind of predicted this, and so he slowed up on that one Punisher there. And Jim ended up bumping him as he tried to cut hard across the formation. And that's going to spell doom for that Seek, because that Seek is dead in the path of the Gazanti. There's no way it can be avoided. And what Jim does when this happens, it kind of causes him to panic a little bit. And I'm just taking the old reinforced token off there. It causes him to panic a little bit. So he turns that second Seek in. He goes, oh god, this one's going to be in the path too. I need to barrel roll it out of the way. But in doing so, because he hadn't planned this with his original moves, he ends up getting a couple more of his ships stuck on that ship, which takes away their actions, so they can't focus. And ultimately, you'll see what happens here as we move forward in this turn. It spells doom for his list. The placement of those ships, especially when you have an epic ship kind of barreling down into your formation, is really critical. If you get too close, what's going to happen is what happens to Jim's ships here. Here we have Jason continuing to move. He slowed up the Punishers here as well. He's going to start throwing target locks out again in preparation for another assault missile. And it's going to spell doom for pretty much the rest of Jim's list here. And he's starting to change his tactics. He's not staying in a perfect formation, but we've turned the flank on Jim's list. And so he's starting to bring his ships around to kind of prepare for that, to continue the turn and really hammer into his list. We went ahead and took that Seek off because it was a gimme death. With my move forward of 4, I actually got 2 ships on that one, so which always makes me happy, brings a smile to my face. And now I'm going to show you a little bit of the moving of my tokens around, because what I'm doing here is I took damage from Jim's hits, but I still got a little bit of energy for the beginning of the turn. I put 2 into my guns. You saw me lay them down, which got me 2 back from the optimized generators. What I did is my movement for this turn, instead of taking a reinforce, instead of doing target lock, is I actually regenerated the shields. And all of that energy that I had been storing all this time let me fill my shields all the way back up. So at this point, he's got a Gazanti that has not been touched. I don't have a reinforced token. I'm not really prepared for defense on this turn, but he ultimately has not touched the Gazanti. He hasn't done any damage to it now. So that kind of scattering of fire the previous turn ultimately was wasted. And that's why it's important that if you're going to choose a target, stick to it and just hammer it with everything you've got. Now Jason's starting to fire. We had a quick discussion on this. He had an assault missile he could fire, and I said, you know what? Fire it. We've got a Gazanti with full shields. Yes, it'll take a point of damage from the assault missile, but who cares? You've got a chance to do damage to the turret there and 2 other ships in addition to your central target. And so, hey, you know what? I take a shield. That's fine. The Empire will gladly take a shield off to have a good chance of hurting 3 ships and possibly killing a 4th. So he does do some good damage. And then the next shot, same thing. I'm going to hammer this thing again with another assault missile, which ultimately destroys that headhunter and does another damage to me. And I don't think we got that turret in range. We might have. But hey, look, does another shield to the Gazanti. No big deal. Now he's got 2 severely wounded ships right in front of us, which he's going to continue to punish. Jim is actually firing back here with those 2 ships. It's kind of ineffectual. He does a little bit of damage here, but nothing major, nothing we can't worry, or nothing we have to worry about too much. And Jason, of course, is going to fire back. He's still stacked up with assault missiles, and he's gonna. Yeah, it has a bad roll there. I don't know if you could see it very well, but he had 3 blanks and an eyeball. But he is still able to make contact with that shot, and that's ultimately all it needed. We got that turret down to 1 hit point, or actually I think it's down to, we've only done 2 points to it, but he did end up destroying that Seek right in front of us. And you can see really quick how that happened. This is turn 4, and by this point, Jim realizes it's over. There's almost nothing he can do to come back from this. This is a pretty hard victory for the Empire. There's very little he can do to come back, and so what we're going to do now is actually have a bit of a kind of a breakdown session, a post-game discussion of what mistakes were made, where we saw problems, because there's nothing you can do as the the scum player at this point to even survive, because the Gazanti is at the midway line. That's what the turrets represent. It's at the halfway point of the field, has barely been touched, and there's little defense at all in front of it. So it's just going to continue to scream forward, and in a couple turns, it's going to be in range with its main gun, which will eat alive the shield generators and the central base if it can get a shot on them, because none of those have any agility. And the Punishers just come in as follow-up at this point. Yes, they can scream in and do damage too. I would put it at maybe 3 turns, 4 turns at the most, and that's just not going to give Jim enough time to get any ships in there. He'd have to have a ton of luck to get there. I mentioned this earlier in the previous video, but the general breakdown here was that Jim kind of clustered all of his ships on one side of the table. So by putting everything in front of us, we're very forward-firing heavy list with the Punishers and with the Gazanti. By putting everything kind of right in our gun sights, he made it really easy for us. And I think had he to do this over again, if he had a chance to play this one again against us, unless we changed our tactics, I think he would have a good grasp of how to attack our ships. But I absolutely welcome people to play this. I've put the link again in to the notes for this video. Please check it out. Please give it a shot. Try this at home and let us know how it went. Was it very easy for the Imperials? Was it balanced? Was it really, really hard for the Imperials? What did you run into? Was it just that we had really good dice rolling and Jim made a couple tactical errors? Or is there an imbalance here that we need to adjust? Because as a group on the podcast, we discussed this, and I don't think it's as uneven as this video shows, but who knows? So thanks for watching.